52 BC. On the dark hills of Elysia, the sky felt heavy with the enemy's breath. As Gallic war cries echoed through the valley, the Roman legions faced not just a battle that day, but a test. Arrows rained like a storm, javelins crashed down like thunder. Some armies would flee at such a moment, others would die where they stood. But the Romans did neither. They refused to run, and they refused to accept death. The legion commander looked at the young soldiers kneeling in the mud. There was no fear in their eyes, only silence, waiting for orders. In that moment, a voice cut through the chaos of war. Testudinem! And what we call a miracle was actually just a few of history's most disciplined movements. The front soldiers dropped to one knee, locking their shields forward. Those behind raised their shields skyward. The flanks closed like a shell, leaving no gaps. In that instant, a giant tortoise made of human bodies and bronze shields began to move across the battlefield. Arrows fell from the sky, but they did not strike Roman chests. They struck shields. Thrown javelins bounced back and fell. The enemy's fury could not break this wall of flesh. This was more than a war tactic. This was Rome's soul. Discipline, order, obedience. Bodies united not just to survive, but to advance. But how did the Romans develop and execute this seemingly invincible tortoise tactic? How did they form such a perfect formation in the middle of battle? And was it really as unbeatable as they say? We are now entering inside history's most famous defensive formation, to discover that the Testudo was not just a tactic, but a human machine as perfect as Roman engineering itself. Make sure to like this video and march with us through history. Tell me in the comments, was it the shields that made Rome an empire, or the discipline behind those shields?
Winter 58 BC, Germania. A Roman scouting party ventured too far north. 20 legionaries, experienced men, veterans of Gaul. But that morning, they learned that experience means nothing when you are outnumbered 10-1. Dramatic warriors emerged from the forest, hundreds of them, screaming, throwing spears. The Romans had seconds to decide, run and die scattered, or stand and die together. They chose a third option, one that would change warfare forever. The centurion shouted a single word, "Close!" The legionaries moved instantly, shields locked, bodies pressed together. They formed a circle, shields facing outward, a wall, not of stone, of flesh and bronze, and they waited. The Germans attacked, wave after wave. Spears bounced off shields, axes could not penetrate. The Romans did not break formation, did not panic, just stood, absorbed the impact, waited for the enemy to exhaust themselves. By afternoon, the Germans withdrew. 20 Romans walked back to camp, all alive, some wounded, but alive, because they had discovered something profound. Individual soldiers die, but a formation survives. This was not yet Testudo. This was its ancestor, the seed of an idea that would become Rome's most famous tactic, because Roman generals were watching, learning, asking the critical question, how do we turn defense into offense? How do we make shields not just protect, but advance? The answer required understanding the fundamental problem of ancient warfare. Arrows, javelins, sling stones, boiling oil, enemies on high ground, enemies behind walls, enemies who could kill you from distance while you approached. Every ancient army faced this problem. Most solved it with speed, charge fast, Hope you reach the enemy before too many arrows find you. Accept casualties as inevitable. This was normal, expected, the cost of war. But Rome rejected this. Rome did not accept inevitable casualties. Rome engineered solutions. And the solution to projectile warfare was simple in concept, extraordinarily difficult in execution. Cover everything, leave no target, become not individual soldiers, but a single armored organism. This required 3 elements. First, the right equipment. Shields large enough to overlap, strong enough to absorb impacts, light enough to carry for miles. Second, the right training. Soldiers who could move in perfect synchronization, who trusted each other absolutely, who would not break under pressure. Third, the right mindset, the understanding that individual survival depended on collective discipline. Rome had all 3, or rather, Rome built all 3, through decades of experimentation, through countless small battles where they tried variations, adjusted, failed, learned, tried again. By the time of Julius Caesar's Gallic campaigns, the Testudo was no longer experimental. It was doctrine, a standard formation every legionary learned, not because it was easy, because it worked. But understanding why it worked requires understanding what made it possible, and that begins with a single piece of equipment, a shield that was not just defensive armor, but an architectural component, the scutum. At first glance, the scutum looked simple, a curved wooden shield, covered in canvas and leather, reinforced with iron edges. Nothing revolutionary, but look closer. The dimensions were precise, 4 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide, curved to wrap around the body, heavy at 10 kilograms, but perfectly balanced. This was not accident, this was engineering. The curve was critical. A flat shield deflects impacts poorly. A curved shield redirects force away from the body. The height was critical, tall enough to cover from chin to shin, short enough to see over, wide enough to overlap with neighboring shields, narrow enough to maneuver. The weight was critical. Too light and it could not stop heavy projectiles. Too heavy and soldiers would exhaust themselves carrying it. 10 kilograms was the perfect compromise. Heavy enough to be effective, light enough for all-day carry. But the real genius was the grip. Not a strap on the forearm like Greek shields, a horizontal hand grip behind a metal boss. This allowed the soldier to punch with the shield, use it as a weapon. More importantly, it allowed precise positioning. The soldier could angle the shield exactly where needed, overlap it perfectly with his neighbor's shield. Because overlap was everything. A wall with gaps is not a wall, it is a target. The testudo had to be seamless, shield edges touching shield edges, no daylight visible, no arrow could slip through. This required shields designed for interlocking. The scutum was that design. But a shield alone does not make a formation. The men carrying them needed protection too, and Rome had engineered that as well. The lorica segmentata, segmented plate armor, iron strips connected by leather straps and brass hooks, articulated, flexible, strong. This armor was revolutionary. Greek hoplites wore bronze breastplates, heavy, rigid, expensive. Roman legionaries wore segmented plates, lighter, more protective, cheaper to produce, and critically, it allowed the full range of motion needed for testudo. Soldiers could raise shields overhead without the armor restricting them, could crouch, could press together tightly. The armor moved with them. The helmet was equally clever, bronze or iron, with cheek guards, a neck guard, a reinforced brow, but also cut away around the ears because soldiers in formation needed to hear commands, needed to communicate. The helmet protected without isolating. Even the sandals were engineered, caligae, thick leather, iron-nailed soles. These were not just footwear, they were traction devices. When forming testudo, soldiers often knelt, pressed shields down into mud. The nailed sandals gave them grip, stability, the ability to hold position under pressure. Every piece of equipment worked together, the shield to protect, the armor to cover gaps, the helmet to guard the head, the sandals to anchor. Nothing was random, everything was calculated, tested, proven. But equipment alone explains nothing, because many armies had good equipment. Few could execute testudo. The difference was not hardware, it was software. The training, the discipline, the absolute unity of movement that turned individual soldiers into a single organism. And that training began long before anyone saw a battlefield.
Campus Martius, Rome's training ground. A young recruit named Marcus stood in formation with 19 other men. They had been drilling for 3 months, sword techniques, marching, digging, but today was different. Today, the centurion introduced them to something that would save their lives or kill them trying to learn it. Testudium formate, the centurion barked. 20 men froze. They had heard the word, knew it meant tortoise, but knowing and doing were different universes. Move! The vine staff cracked across shoulders, not hard enough to injure, hard enough to motivate. The recruits scrambled, shields collided, men stumbled. Someone's shield hit Marcus in the face, blood from his nose. The formation was chaos, a disaster. Stop! The centurion walked through the wreckage of their attempt. You just killed everyone. Congratulations, the enemy is laughing while they pick arrows out of your corpses. He pointed at the front rank. You, kneel, shield forward, edge touching the ground, not tilted, vertical. The soldiers obeyed. Shields formed a wall. Second rank, shield overhead, not flat, angled like roof tiles, each shield overlapping the one in front. They raised shields, some too high, some too low. The centurion adjusted each one manually. See this gap? That is where the arrow kills you. No gaps. Flanks, shields outward, cover the sides, press against your neighbor, feel his shoulder against yours. If you cannot feel him, you are too far apart. It took an hour to form properly. 1 hour, standing still, just positioning shields, no movement, no combat, just placement, and already arms burned, shoulders ached, the weight of the shield became unbearable. Hold position, the centurion ordered. They held. 5 minutes, 10, 15, arms trembling. Some shields began to droop. The vine staff found those soldiers immediately. In battle, you will hold this for hours, not minutes, hours. If your shield drops, your brother dies. If your brother dies, you die. So you will hold. They held. 20 minutes. Marcus's arm felt like fire. His shoulder screamed. His fingers were losing feeling. But the man next to him was holding, so Marcus held. After 30 minutes, the centurion finally called halt. Rest. Tomorrow we do it again, every day until you can form testudum in 5 seconds, until you can hold it for an hour, until you can do it in your sleep. 5 seconds? Impossible. They had just taken an hour. But the centurion was not joking, because in battle, 1 hour to form meant death. 5 seconds meant survival, and Rome did not train soldiers for possibility. Rome trained soldiers for perfection. The next day, they practiced again, this time 40 minutes to form. Still too slow, still gaps in the coverage, still shields at wrong angles, but better, marginally better. Day 3, 30 minutes. The centurion introduced movement. Form testudum. Good. Now walk, slowly. Do not break formation. Shields stay locked. They shuffled forward. Within 3 steps, the formation collapsed. Shields separated. Gaps appeared. Men lost synchronization. Again. They reformed, walked, collapsed.
Again. Reform. Walk. Collapse. Again. For 6 hours they repeated this. Form. Walk. Collapse. Form. Walk. Collapse. By evening, they could take 10 steps before breaking. Only 10 steps, but 10 more than yesterday. This was Roman training, not inspiring speeches, not appeals to courage, just repetition, endless, painful, mind-numbing repetition until the body learned, until formation became instinct, until 20 individual soldiers became one organism. Week 2, they could form in 10 minutes, walk 50 meters without breaking. The centurion introduced obstacles. Form testudum, walk to that tree, maintain formation around it. The tree forced them to compress, squeeze together, adjust shield angles. The formation buckled, reformed, held. Again, faster. Week 3, they could form in 5 minutes. The centurion introduced projectiles, not real arrows, wooden practice javelins, blunt but thrown hard. Form testudum. The shields locked. The javelins came. Thud, thud, thud. Impacts against shields. The formation held, but the psychological effect was immediate. Knowing something was flying at you, trusting your shield, trusting your neighbor's shield, not flinching, not breaking. One recruit flinched, pulled his shield aside. A practice javelin hit his shoulder. Not serious, but enough. "You just died," the centurion said coldly, "and you killed the man behind you because you flinched, you broke discipline. In real battle, that javelin is iron. It punches through your chest, through your neighbor's chest, through 3 men before it stops." The recruit never flinched again. Month 3, they could form in 2 minutes, hold for 30 minutes under simulated arrow fire, walk 200 meters without breaking. They were becoming competent. But competent was not good enough, because competent soldiers die. Only perfect soldiers survive.
Month 6. The day Marcus's unit had been dreading arrived. The centurion led them to a different part of the training ground. A full-scale mock-up of a fortress wall, complete with defenders, veterans, armed with real arrows. Blunted, yes, but real, and they would hurt. "Today you learn why Testudo exists," the centurion said. "You will advance to that wall, under fire. If your formation breaks, arrows find flesh. If you panic, you die. If you hold, you survive. Simple." Marcus felt his heart hammering. This was not practice javelins. This was actual combat simulation. The veterans on the wall looked down at them with amusement. They had done this to countless recruits. They knew what was coming. "Testudinem formate!" The command cut through fear. Bodies moved automatically. 6 months of training took over. Front rank dropped to one knee, shields locked forward, edges to ground. Second and third ranks raised shields overhead, overlapping like roof tiles. Flanks closed, shields pressed outward. Formation complete. 4 seconds. Perfect. "Advance!" They moved, small shuffling steps, synchronized. The front rank moved their feet carefully, shields never leaving the ground. Those with overhead shields stepped in rhythm, left foot, right foot, like a single creature with 20 legs. At 50 meters, the first arrows flew. Not a barrage, a test. 3 arrows. 2 struck overhead shields with dull thuds. 1 hit a front shield and clattered away. The formation held. At 30 meters, the real assault began. 20 arrows at once. The sky darkened. Marcus saw them coming through the tiny gap between shields. His instinct screamed to duck, hide, run. But training overrode instinct. He held position, shield angled precisely as taught. The impacts came like hammer strikes. Thud, 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 thud. Rapid percussion on bronze and wood. The shield in his left hand absorbed 3 hits.
The vibration numbed his arm, but the shield held. The formation held. "Hold position!" the centurion shouted from outside the formation. "Do not adjust! Do not peek! Trust your shields!" Another volley, more impacts. Marcus heard someone grunt as a blunted arrow found a gap near his shoulder. Minor wound, but it proved the point. Gaps kill. At 10 meters, the defenders switched tactics. They threw practice javelins, heavier, faster, more force. One javelin struck Marcus's shield so hard it drove him back half a step. He immediately shuffled forward, closing the gap he had created. "Good," the centurion called. "Recover and close. Always close." 5 meters from the wall, the final test. Defenders dropped stones, not large, but enough to test resolve. Rocks bounced off the overhead shields. The formation compressed slightly, absorbing the bombardment. Then they were at the wall. Mission accomplished. The centurion called halt. "Formation break!" They lowered shields. Every man was soaking with sweat, arms trembling, shoulders burning, but alive, all of them, not a single serious injury, because the formation had worked. The centurion walked among them. For once, he did not criticize. "You just survived what kills most armies. 40 meters of sustained missile fire. Do you understand what you accomplished?" Marcus understood. Without Testudo, half of them would be dead. With Testudo, they took minor wounds at worst. "This is why Rome wins. Not because our soldiers are braver. Gauls are brave. Germans are brave. Brave men die under arrow fire. Disciplined men survive. You survived because you followed training, because you trusted each other, because you became one entity, not 20 individuals." He pointed back at the wall. "Tomorrow we do it again, but faster, and the arrows will not be blunted. You will wear full armor. The veterans will not aim to wound. They will aim to kill any gap they see. That is when you learn whether you are truly legionaries or just well-trained corpses waiting to happen." That night, Marcus could not sleep. His mind replayed every impact, every moment he had wanted to break formation. Every second his instinct had screamed to protect himself individually rather than trust the collective. But he had held. They all had. And tomorrow they would hold again, because that was what legionaries did. They held. Always.
52 BC. Real combat. Marcus was no longer a recruit. He was a legionary of the 10th Legion. And today, at Alesia, theory would meet reality in the most brutal way possible. Caesar's army surrounded Vercingetorix's fortress, but the Gauls were not trapped. They were bait. Behind the Roman lines, a relief army approached, 80,000 warriors. Caesar's legions were caught between two forces, hammer and anvil. This was supposed to be Rome's death. Marcus stood with his sentry on the northern rampart. Through the morning mist, he saw them coming. Not an army, a sea of humanity. Screaming, beating shields. The sound was primal, terrifying, designed to break morale before the first spear flew. "Steady," the centurion's voice cut through the din. "They want you afraid. Show them Roman discipline." The Gauls reached 200 meters. Slingers began. Stones whistled through air, cracked against Roman shields. A legionary beside Marcus took a stone to the helmet, dazed but standing. 100 meters. Archers. Arrows arced high, descending like deadly rain. This was the moment. The centurion made the call that would define the next hour. "Testudinum formate!" Marcus's body moved before his mind processed the command. 6 years of training, shield up, angled,
overlapping with the man in front, shoulder pressed against his neighbor, feet planted. The formation locked in 3 seconds. 20 men became one armored organism. And the arrows came. The sound was unlike training. These were war arrows, iron tips, full draw weight. They hit differently, harder, with killing intent. Thud, crack, thud, crack. Each impact reverberated through the shield into Marcus's arm. His shoulder joint absorbed shocks that would shatter bone without the scutum. Through the tiny viewing gap between shields, Marcus saw arrows bouncing off. Some stuck in shields, some glanced away, some found gaps and wounded men, but most failed. The Testudo was working. "Hold!" the centurion roared. "Do not break. They want panic. Give them nothing." The arrows continued, a storm of iron. Marcus counted impacts on his shield. 7, 10, 15. His arm went numb, but he held, because the man beside him held, because the man behind him depended on him holding. 50 meters, the Gauls switched to javelins, heavier, more penetration. One punched through the shield of the man in front of Marcus, the iron tip stopping inches from the man's face. But he did not drop his shield, did not break formation, just held a shield with a javelin stuck through it. "Advance," came the order. Advance? Into the attack? Madness, but orders were orders. The formation moved, small, shuffling steps, every man in rhythm. The front rank dug shields into mud for leverage. The overhead ranks maintained coverage. They moved forward like a walking fortress. The Gauls hesitated. They had thrown everything, stones, arrows, javelins, and the Romans just kept coming, shields locked, unstoppable. This was not what tribal warriors expected. They expected fear, chaos, breaking lines, not this mechanical advance. At 20 meters, the Testudo stopped. On command, the front rank opened. Behind them, legionaries with pila stepped forward, through. A volley of Roman javelins flew. Gauls fell. Shields were pierced. Front rank closed immediately. Reformed Testudo. The Gauls rushed forward in rage. This was supposed to be their advantage, close combat, but they crashed into the Roman formation like waves against rock. The Testudo absorbed the charge. Shields held. When a Gaul got too close, gladii thrust through tiny gaps in the formation. Short, brutal, efficient. The Gaul fell. The formation closed. No Roman exposed himself. No hero moments, just mechanical violence. This continued for an hour. The Gauls threw themselves at the formation, died against it, but could not break it, because breaking Testudo required breaking Roman discipline, and that was harder than bronze. Finally, the Gauls withdrew. Marcus lowered his shield. His arm would not respond at first, completely numb. His shoulder dislocated, but held by armor and adrenaline, but alive. His entire century alive. This was the true power of Testudo, not invincibility, survival through unity. But every formation has weaknesses, and Rome's enemies were learning them.
48 BC, Pharsalus. Rome fought Rome, Caesar versus Pompey. And in civil war, both sides knew the same tactics, including Testudo's weaknesses. This was the day Marcus learned that no formation is perfect. Caesar's legionaries advanced in Testudo against Pompey's lines. Perfect formation, shields locked, overhead coverage complete. They had done this 100 times. But Pompey's commander had studied Roman tactics for decades. He knew the vulnerabilities. "Cavalry, flank them!" Pompey's order echoed across the field. Marcus saw it coming,
heard the thunder of hooves. Testudo was designed for frontal assault, for arrow fire from ahead and above. But cavalry, from the side? That was different. That was the nightmare scenario. "Hold formation!" the centurion shouted, but his voice carried uncertainty, because they all knew what was about to happen. Testudo could not turn quickly. The shields were locked forward and overhead. The flanks had minimal protection. When cavalry hit from the side, there was no time to reorient, no time to adjust. The impact was catastrophic. Horses crashed into the side of the formation, not directly into shields, into the narrow gaps between men, into the weak points. The formation buckled. Men were knocked down. Shields separated. The integrity collapsed. Once gaps appeared, cavalry exploited them. Spears thrust downward, swords hacked. Within 30 seconds, Testudo was broken. Men scattered. Some tried to fight individually. They died. Others tried to reform. Too slow. They died. Marcus survived by abandoning formation entirely, threw himself flat, let cavalry pass over. When he stood, 20 men who had been in perfect Testudo formation were dead or dying, not because they lacked courage, because they faced a threat the formation could not counter. This was Testudo's first weakness, mobility. In tight formation, soldiers could not maneuver, could not dodge, could not respond to threats from unexpected angles. They were committed to one direction, one purpose. If the enemy attacked from that direction, Testudo was perfect. From any other direction, vulnerable. The second weakness revealed itself at Dyrrhachium. Caesar's forces tried to breach Pompey's fortifications. They advanced in Testudo under arrow fire. Perfect execution. The arrows bounced off. But when they reached the walls, disaster struck. The defenders dropped barrels of heated sand. Not boiling oil, sand. It sounded harmless. It was not. The sand poured through the tiny gaps between shields, entered armor, got inside clothing, and it was hot enough to burn flesh. Soldiers screamed, tried to remove armor, but Testudo required holding shields, holding position. They had to choose, maintain formation and burn, or break formation and die to arrows. They broke. Testudo dissolved. Arrows found targets. The assault failed, because Testudo could only protect against projectiles that hit shields. Anything that bypassed shields, anything that flowed or scattered, could defeat it. Third weakness, endurance. Testudo was exhausting, holding a 10-kilogram shield at arm's length or overhead for hours while walking, while wearing armor. The human body has limits. After an hour, arms shake, shields droop, gaps appear. At the siege of Alesia, some formations held Testudo for 3 hours under constant bombardment. By the end, men could barely stand. Their shields were at chest height instead of overhead. Coverage was compromised. When the Gauls finally charged, the exhausted Romans could barely defend themselves. Fourth weakness, close quarters. Testudo was designed for approaching enemies, for covering distance under fire. But once you reached the enemy, you had to break formation to fight. There was no way to maintain Testudo while engaging in melee combat. This created a critical moment, the transition from formation to individual combat, that moment of vulnerability. Experienced enemies waited for it, let the Romans approach in Testudo, then attacked the instant the formation opened. At Gergovia, the Gauls perfected this counter-tactic. They let Romans advance in perfect Testudo, did not waste arrows, just waited. When the Romans were 5 meters away and beginning to break formation to attack, the Gauls charged, caught the legionaries in transition. Half were still locked in formation, half were trying to draw weapons. Neither group could fight effectively. The massacre lasted minutes. Marcus watched an entire century destroyed. not because they failed to execute Testudo, because they executed it perfectly, then had to stop, and stopping was when they died. These weaknesses were real, exploitable, fatal, but Rome learned from every defeat, and what they learned would make Testudo even more deadly.
Training evolved. After witnessing Testudo's weaknesses, Roman tacticians adapted. Marcus, now a grizzled veteran in Optio, found himself teaching the next generation. But he was not teaching his father's Testudo. He was teaching something refined by blood lessons. "Listen," Marcus addressed the recruits. "Testudo is not one formation. It is three. Learn all three. Know when to use each." He drew in the sand. "First, standard Testudo, what you have learned. Front and overhead coverage. Use this approaching walls, under arrow fire, when you need maximum protection from above." He drew again. "Second, extended Testudo. Shields less compressed, more spacing between men. Use this on open ground, against light missile fire. Conserves energy, allows faster movement." Third drawing, wedge Testudo. Formation narrows to a point. Front rank only 3 men. Each rank behind adds 2 more. Creates an armored spearhead. Use this to punch through enemy lines, to break shield walls. The recruits looked confused. This was more complex than they expected. "You must read the battle," Marcus continued. "Standard Testudo approaching walls? Yes, but on open field against cavalry? No. Break into smaller formations, 4-man teams, each team its own mini Testudo, harder to flank, more mobile." This was the genius of Roman adaptation. They did not abandon Testudo when they discovered its weaknesses. They multiplied it, made it flexible, tactical. Now the critical part, Marcus's voice hardened. Transitioning from Testudo to combat. This is where men die. So we train the transition until you can do it sleeping. He demonstrated with veteran legionaries. Testudo advances, stops 5 meters from enemy. Front rank drops to 1 knee, shields remain locked. Second rank draws pila, throws over first rank. First rank still covered, no exposure. The javelins flew, immediate, coordinated. First rank stands, all ranks draw gladii. Front rank opens shield slightly, just enough to thrust through. Back ranks maintain overhead coverage. You are still protected while you fight. Never fully break formation until enemy breaks first. This was the evolution. Old Testudo broke formation to fight. New Testudo fought from within formation. Partial opening, controlled exposure. The shield wall became a fighting wall. But the most important adaptation addressed the cavalry problem. Marcus had lived through that nightmare at Pharsalus. He would not let another generation experience it. Cavalry approaches from the flank. You cannot turn Testudo fast enough, so you do not turn it, you birth a new one. He had the recruits demonstrate. Standard Testudo facing forward. He shouted, "Equites dextra," cavalry right. The right flank peeled off. 4 men. They formed their own mini Testudo facing right. The main formation compressed to fill the gap. Now 2 Testudos, one facing forward, one facing the cavalry threat, both protected. This requires trust, Marcus emphasized. The men who peel off are temporarily alone, exposed. They must form fast. The main formation must not panic, must not break to help them. Everyone does their job. Everyone survives. They drilled this endlessly. Cavalry left, cavalry right, cavalry rear. Each time, small groups peeling off, forming, protecting the flank, the main formation compressing, but holding. After months, the recruits could execute flank defense in under 10 seconds, fast enough to counter cavalry charges, fast enough to survive what had killed Marcus's friends at Pharsalus. The endurance problem required a different solution. Marcus taught rotation. You cannot hold Testudo for 3 hours. Nobody can. So you do not hold for 3 hours. You rotate for 20 minutes. Front rank to rear, rear to front. overhead shields lowered, fresh men raised shields overhead. The formation never fully broke, always maintained coverage, but men got rest, recovered strength, could sustain Testudo indefinitely through rotation. This requires counting. Every man counts to 1,000. When you reach 1,000, rotation signal. Practice until automatic. This was Roman discipline at its peak, not just following orders, but internalized timekeeping, self-managed endurance, every soldier a part of a machine that maintained itself. By the time Marcus finished training these recruits, they could execute 7 different Testudo variations, could transition between them mid-battle, could counter cavalry, sustain for hours, and fight from within formation. This was not the Testudo of Caesar's time. This was its perfected descendant, forged by defeats, refined by survival, the ultimate expression of Roman tactical evolution. But theory and practice are different worlds, and these recruits would soon learn it in the most unforgiving classroom of all, Masada.
73 A.D. Masada, a mountain fortress in Judea. Jewish rebels held the summit. Roman legions surrounded the base. This was not a battle. This was a siege, and Testudo would face its ultimate test. The fortress sat on a plateau 400 meters above the desert floor, sheer cliffs on all sides, one narrow path to the top. The rebels had supplies for years. They believed themselves untouchable. They had never seen Roman engineering combined with Testudo. General Silva surveyed the mountain. His engineers presented the plan: build a ramp, stone and earth, ascending the entire western face, then push siege towers up the ramp to the walls. Insane! A ramp 400 meters high. It would take thousands of tons of material, months of labor, all while rebels rained death from above. "Begin," Silva ordered. The work began at the base. Slaves and legionaries hauled stones, dumped earth. Gradually, impossibly, a ramp began to form. But the moment workers got within arrow range, death rained down. Arrows, rocks, spears. Men died by the dozens. "Testudo," Silva commanded. "All work parties, constant coverage." What followed was Testudo's most impressive demonstration, not in battle, in construction. Workers formed Testudo, advanced to the ramp, began building, all while maintaining formation, shields overhead, arrows bouncing off. They worked in shifts, 20 minutes under Testudo, rotate, fresh men, fresh shields. The rebels were horrified. They threw everything: fire arrows, boulders, boiling oil. The Testudo absorbed it all. When fire arrows stuck in shields, Romans simply replaced the shield. Formation never broke. Work never stopped. Month after month, the ramp grew. Rebels watched in disbelief as Romans built a mountain to reach their mountain, and there was nothing they could do. Every attack failed. Every projectile hit shields. The Testudo was not just defensive, it was offensive, a tool of siege engineering. After 7 months, the ramp reached the walls. A siege tower rolled up, still under Testudo. The tower's base was essentially a mobile fortress, Testudo formation surrounding it, pushing it, protecting it. When the tower reached the walls, the rebels set it on fire. The tower burned, but the Testudo around it held. Romans inside the tower evacuated, walked through the fire, shields overhead, down the ramp, reformed at the bottom. Casualties: 3 men with burns. Acceptable. Silva built a second tower, this time with fire-resistant hides soaking in water. Again, Testudo pushed it up. The rebels had no answer. They could not stop the tower, could not stop the formation, could not stop Rome. The fortress fell, not because Jewish rebels lacked courage. They had courage, but courage alone cannot defeat engineering, cannot defeat discipline, cannot defeat Testudo. This siege proved something profound. Testudo was not just a battlefield tactic, it was a universal solution to the problem of exposure. Anytime Romans needed protection from above, Testudo answered. Construction, siege work, fortification. The formation was limited only by Roman imagination. But Masada also revealed Testudo's psychological power. The rebels did not just face a military formation, they faced proof of Roman inevitability. Watching that ramp grow day after day under perfect shield coverage broke their will before the final assault even began. At the siege of Jerusalem 3 years earlier, Titus had used Testudo in urban warfare. Streets too narrow for large formations. Solution? Mini Testudos, 4-man teams, each protecting the others, clearing buildings, advancing block by block. The Jewish defenders fought fiercely, but Testudo turned city fighting from chaos into systematic clearance. At Alesia, Caesar had used Testudo to build fortifications while surrounded. Dig trenches under arrow fire? Testudo while digging. Plant stakes? Testudo coverage. Build walls? Mobile Testudo. The Gauls could not stop construction they could not target. These were Testudo's true legacy, not invincibility in battle, but adaptability to any situation requiring protection. Rome took a simple concept, overlap shields, and evolved it into a universal tool. Battlefield defense, siege offense, engineering protection, urban warfare. Other armies copied it. Germanic tribes tried, failed. They lacked discipline, lacked standardized equipment, lacked training culture. Copying the formation was easy. Executing it under pressure, that required being Roman. By the 2nd century AD, Testudo was so ingrained in Roman doctrine that it appeared on Trajan's column, carved in stone, immortalized, not as propaganda, as instruction. Future legionaries could study the carvings, see proper formation, learn from marble. But empires fall, and with them, their tactics. The Testudo that dominated for 3 centuries would face its own mortality.
378 AD, Adrianople, the beginning of the end, not just for Testudo, for Rome itself. The Eastern Roman Empire faced the Goths. Emperor Valens commanded 60,000 legionaries, the finest heavy infantry in the world, trained in Testudo, equipped with scuta, disciplined, professional. They faced what they assumed was a rabble, barbarian cavalry and infantry, poorly organized, lightly armored. The assumption was fatal. The battle began conventionally. Roman legions advanced in Testudo formations. Arrows from Gothic infantry bounced off shields. The formation held, everything proceeding as planned. The Romans had done this for centuries. They knew how this ended, with Roman victory. Then the Gothic cavalry returned from foraging, thousands of horsemen, not the light cavalry Rome was accustomed to, heavy cavalry, armored horses, lanced riders, moving fast, hitting hard. They struck the Roman flank. The legions tried the counter-drill, peel off sections, form flank Testudos, but the cavalry was too fast, too heavy. The mini Testudos formed, the cavalry crashed through them anyway. Shields shattered, men were trampled. The formation, perfect on paper, collapsed under kinetic violence it was never designed to stop. Within an hour, the Roman army was destroyed. 2/3 killed, Emperor Valens dead. And with that battle, something else died. The dominance of heavy infantry, the supremacy of formation combat, the era of Testudo.
Because Adrianople proved what Roman enemies had suspected for decades. Cavalry had evolved. Heavy cavalry with stirrups, lances, and armored horses could break infantry formations that arrows and javelins could not. Testudo was obsolete, not useless, but no longer supreme. The Western Roman Empire spent its final century trying to adapt. They hired Gothic cavalry, reduced reliance on infantry, but this created a paradox. Rome's strength had always been discipline, professional infantry, testudo. By abandoning these, Rome abandoned what made it Rome. By 476 AD, when the last Western emperor fell, testudo was a memory. The legions that had perfected it were disbanded, replaced by foederati, barbarian mercenaries who fought as individuals, who knew nothing of shield discipline, who thought testudo was old-fashioned. They were wrong. Not about testudo being outdated, about what it represented, because testudo was never just a tactic, it was a philosophy. The idea that discipline defeats courage, that collective strength beats individual heroism, that engineering and training can overcome any obstacle. This philosophy did not die with Rome. It evolved, transformed, appeared in different forms across different centuries.
Medieval shield walls were testudo's descendant. Vikings and Saxons locked shields, formed walls, protected each other. They lacked Roman training, Roman equipment, but they understood the core concept: unity survives, individuals die. Renaissance pike formations were testudo in spirit, densely packed, mutually supporting, each pike protecting the man beside him. Different weapons, same principle. Collective defense through disciplined positioning. Modern riot police use testudo, not explicitly, not by name, but watch them advance, shields locked, overlapping, moving in unison, protecting each other from projectiles. That is testudo. 2,000 years later, different shields, same formation, same reason. It works. Military historians study testudo not as ancient history, but as tactical innovation. The concept of mutual supporting fires, of overlapping fields of protection, of subordinating individual action to collective defense. These are modern military doctrines, and they descend directly from Roman testudo. Even the name survives in Latin. In military terminology, tortoise formation appears in modern tactical manuals. As a historical reference, yes, but also as a principle. When exposed to fire from above, compact and cover. Simple, effective, timeless. But testudo's greatest legacy is not tactical, it is philosophical. Rome proved that average men, properly trained and equipped, could defeat superior warriors. That system beats talent. That discipline defeats courage. That victory belongs not to the bravest, but to the most organized. This idea transformed warfare. Before Rome, battles were won by heroes, champions. The strongest warrior decided the day. After Rome, battles were won by logistics, training, coordination. The best system decided the day. Testudo was the visible expression of this revolution. 20 men with shields, moving as one, proved that collective discipline could defeat any individual threat. This was not just military innovation, this was social engineering. The idea that ordinary people working together under shared discipline could achieve extraordinary things. Marcus died in 79 AD. Old for a legionary, retired, living on his land grant in Pannonia. He never saw Adrianople, never saw Rome fall, never knew testudo would become obsolete. But on his final day, he remembered the first time shields locked, the first time arrows bounced off,
The first time he understood that he was not alone, that 20 men moving as one were stronger than 100 fighting as individuals. That lesson never died, because it was never just about shields. It was about us, humanity, our weakness as individuals, our strength as collectives, our ability to organize, discipline, and overcome. Testudo was not tactics, it was proof. Proof that walls of flesh, when properly arranged, become walls of iron. Proof that ordinary men, bound by training and trust, become extraordinary. Proof that Rome's greatest weapon was never the gladius or the pilum. It was the man beside you, holding his shield, protecting you, while you protected him. 2,000 years later, that is still the lesson, still the answer, still the reason Testudo matters. Not because of what it was, because of what it meant. Discipline, unity, trust, the eternal foundations of human achievement, carved not in marble, but in the memory of shields locked together, held by men who understood that survival belongs not to the strongest, but to those who stand together.